Hi, everyone, and welcome to Real with Reid, episode 9. And on today's episode, we are going to continue the conversation about law enforcement. And as we've discussed previously, it is certainly a topic that is front and center in our day, and maybe in new ways, maybe raising questions. Maybe they're old questions, but with a new twist. And I thought it would be interesting to hear from someone who's been at just about every level of law enforcement. My new friend Ken has been a trooper, has been with the Department of Defense, has been, you name it, as you're going to hear in a second, and Ken has experienced it. And he's one of the smartest people that I've ever encountered in terms of completely understanding the landscape in which we ask the questions of the purpose and the role and the state of law enforcement in our day. So sit back and enjoy. This is Real with Reid, episode 9. It starts right now. Well, I'm here with Ken, and we are going to spend the next few minutes talking about faith from the perspective of law enforcement. And I'm going to start, Ken, by just saying thanks for being willing to do this and give us a little bit of background of you have a lot of different experiences in the law enforcement sector. Give us a sense of what that's been in your life.
Thanks, Reid. First of all, it's a pleasure being here to be able to provide a little bit of perspective with the times and the circumstances that are going on now. Yeah. I came on with the state police in 1991. Worked road patrol for a while, got into canine. I was the youngest canine handler they had. Back around 1993, I had an explosives dog and a drug dog. Did that for a while, did drug interdiction for about 7 years. Was assigned to the airport for a little bit of time for explosives work down there, bomb threats. I was one of 4 dogs in the state for bomb threats, whether that was the court or universities or wherever they were.
Wow.
Did policy, legislation for a while, counterterrorism for about 10 years, especially weapons of mass destruction. Went overseas and taught several countries overseas doing that. Rotated in through many different administrative jobs, budget, grants, command of grants management. That was the inspector general for a while at the state police. Had Frederick Barrack for, I want to say, about 2.5 years. I had Camp David as part of my responsibilities when I was out there.
Wow.
Moved from there to promotional testing, and I had our education and training division for a few years. And then moved out of there and ended up on staff for the colonel and the governor, a couple of different governors. My last position right before I retired, I had 28 years in. I was the chief technology officer for the state police. Had about 6 different divisions, licensing, that was all your firearms, firearm purchases, handgun permits, other licenses. I had technology, records, statewide records, a number of other divisions. And then I was the governor's statewide interoperability director for any public safety projects that help law enforcement, fire, 911, emergency management communicate either through data or video, drones, communications, radio systems, or anything like that. And then in that position, I work with the other surrounding mid-Atlantic states with FEMA and Homeland Security, and nationally ran a couple committees trying to help public safety communicate using different forms of emergency communication across the spectrum to provide better services for those times that matter to the public.
Yeah. Well, so that is quite a diverse perspective from being on the patrol in a patrol car with a dog to being all the way at the other end of the training and all that. How did your perspective on law enforcement change as your perspective changed? Did you get a different sense when you were in the patrol car versus when you were teaching versus when you were doing online, communication stuff? How did it broaden? Did it get more clear? How would you describe how your perspective changed?
It did. A couple things happened during my 28-year journey. When I first came on, I was very much about justice. I was very much about doing the right thing and enforcement. And as a police officer, you have a lot of discretion, whether that's a traffic stop and you're going to issue a warning, which doesn't go on your record at MBA. You're going to issue a ticket. You're going to make an arrest. You're not going to make an arrest. You go to a domestic or you go to another call. You have a great deal of discretion, personal discretion on what you do. And as I went furthering my career, I would say that I became a little bit more mercy, a little bit more wisdom, and realized that every situation didn't require or actually need enforcement. Enforcement was actually a detriment to the end state solution that you were trying to get to. Some people needed services, or they needed resources brought in, or they needed another chance, right? So it was really kind of having a more global perspective on how do we solve this situation as I went through my career. As I went through too, on the road, obviously that was extremely dangerous. I dealt with cartels. I had the DEA, the CIA was involved in some of my cases. It was dangerous. And then as I got into training, I started realizing and looking at a lot of data and a lot of analytics as far as use of force. I had all the use of force statistics, had all the use of force statistics towards the end of my career for all the police departments, as we reported that up to Congress and the FBI and the governor's office and legislature every year. And a few things I realized is, there were officers at that time that were given tools, right? Less lethal tools at their disposal. They were trained to use those tools. And in some cases, as time went on, I started seeing a pattern where they weren't resorting to those tools. They were going hands-on. So let's just say, for instance, pressure point control, or it hurts a person, and if they're not complying, but they're not being extremely combative or fighting you, or using pepper spray, right? Both of those things won't hurt the person. They'll cause any permanent injuries to the person, but they avoid you putting your hands on the person. In many cases, these people are agitated. Some of them have pre-existing medical conditions that you aren't aware of when you get to the scene of something, and they allow you to take care of with the least amount of escalation and force necessary to make an arrest. The minute you go hands-on, you introduce risk to yourself of getting hurt, and I started seeing an increase in injuries to police officers, and then also an increase in injuries to the people they were trying to arrest or subdue at that point in time. So that was a little trend I did see there in my career as I moved through different departments. And then towards the end, obviously it was all about how to communicate data or information or video or intelligence or criminal investigation data, gang data, terrorism data. How do we provide that out to the street officer on the ground so they have the maximum amount of information to make a good decision at the end of the day?
Boy, about 100 questions have come up in my mind as you talk about that. And one, I don't want to miss this when you said it, that enforcement, we call it law enforcement, and you, at least correct me if I'm wrong, said that sometimes enforcement wasn't the best thing to do. There were other avenues that were more productive that wouldn't require you to get to enforcement. Did I hear you
That's
correctly?
Right. Yeah. That's right. Sometimes it was counterproductive and actually made the situation worse. I mean, if you have a person that's been in jail 3 different times, are you really going to fix the situation by sending them to jail a 4th time? Or maybe in that instance, that person needs some resources, some help, or other out of the box or unconventional assistance that they need. I mean, how every time you're walking up on something, there's a problem to solve or someone to help. And enforcement to me was always the last resort if you could work it out and help those people another way.
Wow. And that, it seems like it flows right into this next piece of saying, in our day, there is a sort of the last 6 months anyway, there have been heightened tensions about that very piece of, is there enough help and too much enforcement? And you brought up, the use of force in that, and just the idea that it feels like to me that some officers now feel like they're the bad guys. They've been painted as such. How does that affect how they are able to do their job? It seems to me that it must make it even harder than it already was, if that's a perception in the community.
So when I was in the academy, Rodney King happened. And we talked about it. We watched the videos over and over, and we talked about how, the use of force that was used in that case, that he wasn't actively resisting or fighting. Now, granted, sometimes you see a video, you don't see the beginning of the video, you don't see the end of the video, you don't know all the circumstances. That's why an investigation is important in those cases, to gather all the facts to make a determination of what the officers did. Was it right? Was it consistent with law, constitutional law? Was it consistent with the policy? When you're doing your job, certain aspects of your job or certain calls are going to require you to use some form of force, whether that person just doesn't want to have handcuffs put on them, they're a drunk, or, in some cases, as we've seen, it may call for deadly force. And when you feel like your bosses or politicians they don't have your back, even when you're doing the right thing, you're going to be very less prone to taking action, even though it's the right thing, and there may be instances where you got to immediately take that action. I remember, Reid, a good example of that is Howard County Police a number of years ago put a policy out that you had to do a report if you drew your service weapon. So there are times that you are going to a call, it's a high risk call, there's something else, there's some other information you've been given. Maybe you're going to a domestic, and the person involved in the domestic you were there 2 nights ago told you the next time you show up, they're going to shoot. So you may have your firearm out. You're not pointing it at anyone, but it takes a little bit of time to get it out of your holster and all the safety mechanism to get it out. So maybe you have it at your side. Maybe there were nights that I walked up on a night stop where there's nobody around for miles and miles and miles, just me, and I've got 5 people in a car, and there's something, I obviously symptoms or signs of something going on that's criminal behavior, and I may have had that at my ready. Well, Howard County Police made you write a report if you were in the county police department if you pulled your weapon out for any reason. So what that did was deter officers from drawing their weapon, even in those cases that they felt like they needed it out for their own personal protection. So I think when you see those things happen, even though you're doing the right thing, you're consistent with training, you're consistent with that person's constitutional rights that you're interacting with, at the end of the day, it's going to make you hesitate, not take action, not use force, and as a result of that, people can get hurt, including the police officer.
Yeah. Well, what a great example. And I wouldn't even have thought about it. You said that if you draw your firearm, you have to write a report. I thought it seems reasonable. And I'm sure no one had the intent of making it harder for the officer to protect themselves or the community that they were patrolling. But there you have it. What
good intentions in many cases come with unintended intentions, right?
Yeah. And so you then moved into, at one point in your career, as you said, the training side of that, which we hear a lot about today. What we need is better training to prevent some of these tragedies that are happening. What's your perspective on what's the effective trainingness? The effectiveness of training as you experienced it, and how can we do it better?
Well, I think is there a time right now that's calling out to defund police departments? I'm very passionate about now is not the time to defund police departments. Now's the time.
I don't even know what that means, by the way. Let's come back to that.
Yeah, we'll come back to that in a minute. But now's the time not to be defunding police departments. Now's the time to be investing if they want to see this problem reduced or addressed. Now's the time to invest money in training. In my many circles going around in other states, other local, municipal, city, county, other state departments, one of the things I notice is some police departments, their training is the absolute minimum level for that state certification. So they don't get 6 months of intensive constitutional law and use of force training every day and things like that. It's minimal. And so that's the first breakdown there is, you should know if you're an officer and the person's not actively resisting or fighting you and they're on the ground and you've got 8 other officers there that can immediately jump in and subdue the person or hold the person down to get handcuffs on them, that you don't need to have your foot on a person's neck, right? You don't need that. It's just completely unnecessary at that point. He's not actively fighting. He's not throwing fists at you. You've got plenty of officers there to handle the situation. And then, you should also know that if someone tells you that they can't breathe or they got a medical problem, you don't know. You don't know what their underlying medical condition is, or what may, like I said, any type of physical confrontation I found through statistics elevates their blood pressure, their heart rate, and can exacerbate underlying medical conditions where it could send them into coronary arrest or cause another problem. So number one, I think police departments need more training, not less. Particularly in constitutional law, use of force. Many years ago, I think it was Tennessee versus Gardner, you could shoot a fleeing felon in the back. And the Supreme Court changed that and said, no, you can't do that anymore. That only certain felons that are armed, that committed a felony, and there's got to be certain circumstances there. One of them is that they're an immediate danger to the public. They may shoot or kill someone again, right? So the courts rule on that. You've got to know what the court rulings are. You have to know court precedents. You have to know what's approved by your department. The second element, I think, of that is accountability. Right? If your supervisor has to make sure that they're holding you accountable for following policies, following laws, including the person's constitutional rights that they have, and that if they come upon a scene or they see something on a videotape, that either a body camera in-car video or you report, that they're addressing that there and then, right? And then there's the culture of the police department that starts at the top. And in certain cases with police department, there has been a culture to allow that to happen. So there's like a 3-step process here. It starts at the top as far as leadership, expectations, proper treatment of people that you're going to have contact with. 2, accountability at the supervisory and management level. And 3, in many cases, police departments could use more money for more training because some departments I've run across, again, it's absolute minimum.
Just the
and
minimum,
just some of the things I'm seeing, or some of the use of force cases I'm seeing on TV, and granted, I haven't seen the whole video, but just the snippets I've seen, I would say, there's no way in my old department you would not face serious consequences for the actions that you took that was inconsistent with your training, inconsistent with the law, and inconsistent with what the policy was as far as use of force.
Yeah. Okay. And so I don't know how long we are into the interview, but you're a person of faith, and it's important in your life. And how did your faith affect the way that you did all of the jobs, but specifically, in the street jobs that you had, and then in the supervisory jobs? And when you got to when you talk about culture coming from the top, you were pretty close to the top some of the time. And so how did faith play a role in that?
So a couple of things. First of all, it made me do the right things for the right reason all the time. I was always compelled to do the right things because of my faith. Even when I had someone in my car that was trying to kick the windshield out or spit on me or, do other things, you still were compelled to treat the person properly at all times. It wasn't a conditional treatment of what they did. You had to treat them the right way all the time. I had a very good relationship with everyone I arrested. We actually would have conversation in the car. I maybe get them a soda when we got back, and I got a lot of intelligence. There was a respectful relationship. They understood I had to do in most cases what I had to do, but it was not confrontational, and it was probably a difficult circumstance for the other person who was in handcuff and facing charges. So
it's not a great day.
It
sure.
Wasn't.
Yeah.
A couple things come to mind. I heard a sermon from Ravi Zacharias on Sunday coming down here, and one of the things he said was, your race and ethnicity as a person is a sacred right and privilege. It's handed to you. It's given you by God, and it should be treated that way. And when I was out and having contact with the general public, or had to enforce something or make an arrest or whatever, I always reminded myself that God had created everyone in his own image. He loved every one of these people. And so that if I mistreated someone that was out there, I was mistreating somebody who he made. And he would not expect that either. The last thing I would say is, a lot of times I went to work, I found myself in very precarious or very strange circumstances, because I'd come to work some days and pray as I'm on my way to work, Lord, what are you going to have me do today? Or where am I going today? Or what's going to happen today? And obviously my career, it was the whole gambit of things that I experienced. So I do believe he put me in places and at times and circumstances that he wanted me. I had two bridge jumpers, there was two ladies on two different dates and two different days that were going to kill themselves.
Wow.
And he put me at the exact location, the time, and the place to intervene during that time to talk to them and stop them from doing that. So I kind of every day was like a Christian. Any Christian should be looking at their day. I was a Christian police officer looking at my day as far as there were opportunities, and I was going to go places and come in contact with a lot of different people. And what did he have for me that day? What opportunities were going to present themselves for that day? So that was my Christian perspective, doing the right thing for the right reasons all the time. It wasn't conditional based on how that person treated me. And some people treated you pretty bad with what they said, what they did. Number two, respecting everyone and understanding everybody was made by God. He loves everybody. Those are your brothers and sisters that you're coming in contact with, and everyone deserves, the same decent, good treatment. And then you'll be held accountable for that, not by your supervisor or your manager, by God, on how you treat other people. And the third thing was, what opportunities is God opening up every day as you go to work, and all the contact you're going to have with people, and like the bridge jumpers, and other people. I had an opportunity, domestics and things, to sit down and talk to them, talk occasionally about church. I remember I was at a Clifton Park one day doing a Convoy of Hope. We were bringing a huge Christian national program or international program into Clifton Park to hand out free food and groceries and health clinics and do a lot of good for the inner city community. And I remember being there one day, just looking at as the chief of security there, the layout before we actually had the event on the weekend. And there was a homeless man that came up to me, and he says, "Hey, I'm really, really hungry. Can you give me money?" I said, "No, but I'll give you the lunch I packed. I'll give you my bottle of water. I think I got a couple more bottles of water and some protein bars." So that was an opportunity that I was not expecting, that I was able to answer because I was there at that time and had contact with that person.
Yeah. It's interesting that you described justice and mercy, and the ability to hold those two things together, I think, is exactly the gospel, right? That the ability to not allow either one to be let go of, to hold them both together, and what better representation of that in the law enforcement field, to be able to treat someone like a person, but also uphold the law. And so it's a clear picture for me. This is a little bit of a flyer based on, I've had a couple other conversations with law enforcement folks, and that I'm a pastor of a church, and we sometimes pray for our law enforcement first responders, and I think that's a great thing. Probably we can be more intentional about that. But how else have you ever seen the church and the law enforcement community help each other, in terms of, because it appears to me on one level, this might be a little bit of a reach, that we're after the same thing in terms of people living in a community where they can flourish and reach their God-given potential. We're in one way, we're after the same thing, but we don't often think about one another as partners. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we would have law enforcement days that we would go to that churches sponsored. And we would come to the church, and we would sit through the whole service, and we would interact with the community there, the church community there, and the pastor. And that would happen every year, and we got to know the people there. So a couple of things I see, obviously prayer for protection, for guidance, for wisdom, for law enforcement. That's very important. And I think that means a lot to the law enforcement community. Number two, if a church has programs, it's very important to let the local law enforcement know that. Because again, I had a toolkit of programs the state offered, programs I knew the county had. And if I had social services, if I had a toolkit where the church had programs too that were available, those are things that I might be able to use as resources to recommend to the person, or give them more information, or give them a brochure or something like that, whether it was domestic violence, or ran across somebody who was sexually assaulted as a child. Now they're an adult and they're having problems with that, or something like that. Services I could possibly provide them more information on. And really, as a law enforcement officer, when I would go to these annual invites to these churches, in many cases, they were mostly Black churches. And I would spend time talking to the parishioners and the people there about their perspective on law enforcement. I'd want to know what they thought. I want to know what they felt. I want to know how they thought we could improve their community, or how we could improve police services or communications or other things based on their perspective of how we were doing. And it was a very open dialogue because we were both on neutral ground. So there was really it was a nice opportunity for us to engage with them, to hear what they thought, try to get some feedback on improvements. And when you meet friends there, and then, you meet them the next year, and the next thing you know, you're driving past their house and they may be out and you're waving to them or saying something to them. And, it's forming that relationship, and also understanding how the church can play a role in that problem solving when you go to these calls and you're dealing with people. All people are broken. All people are sinners. We're all broken, all of us, right? So when you go there and you have a call, it's, what is the best thing I can do to help the situation out? What's the best thing I can do to help person out? Sometimes it's enforcement, and sometimes it's mercy, but exactly what you said is reflecting on, a lot of times we've gotten mercy in Christ's case, we've gotten mercy and didn't deserve any of it, right?
Yeah.
So it's when you reflect on that, it's, how can I fix this situation? How can I help this family? How can I help this person? But understanding the church's programs and what they have to offer in the local community is a help for the local police officer if they're doing community-based policing.
Yeah. And look, I don't have any grand plans, but it just does strike me after having several conversations here that there's perhaps no other organization besides the government. I guess I have to stop and think about if I even agree with that or not. But other than the church, there's very few organizations that have the capacity of reach that affect almost every community in our country. I mean, there's a church in almost every corner of the of the state and the country, and if the church saw their role as being a partner for the community, right? We just did this for the community campaign, that maybe God would do some really neat stuff in terms of what seemed like to people, at least on a layman's level, not a law enforcement person, some really, really tough dilemmas that we're facing in our culture these days. I wonder if the church could be a part of the solution.
I would say two things. I would say, because the church is more engaged with the community and their local area than the government is, right? Like you kind of alluded to that. And in many cases, the church can offer solutions or programs that the government can offer, that if and this may sound a little harsh, if the church was fully doing its duties and responsibilities in the community, you would need a whole lot less government. I mean, that is the role of the church.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I do. I don't have a blueprint of how to get from A to Z, but maybe we can go to B or C on my watch anyway. Well, our time's almost over, Ken, but I told you at all the end of my podcasts, I say, what question would you want to ask me? You have one for me?
I don't. I can't really think of anything to offer you. I'm trying to think of a really difficult question for you, Reid.
Well, thanks a lot for that. Yeah.
I was going to ask you why you're a Redskins fan, but you already answered that a couple weeks ago.
Oh, my word. And it's the team formerly known as the Redskins now. Right. We're not even the Redskins anymore.
That's true. The Washington football team. You're right. I don't have any questions. I just really appreciate you trying to get different perspectives on this. It's a very difficult issue.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be. It's a breakdown of communication. It's a breakdown of standards. It's a breakdown of training. And I think the church has a big role to play in this, as far as having people understand different perspectives and what's going on right now, and maybe even being a mediator and all that, like you're doing right now, between the law enforcement community and other people within and without the outside of the church as well. So thank you for that. It's important.
Well, let's pray that we don't run away from the issue. We run towards it. We bring the gospel into it, and we know that God's got power to change things that we wouldn't even dream of. So
that's right.
We'll pray for that. Well, thank you, Ken. I do appreciate it, and we'll pray for you. and all the law enforcement folks as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Reid.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Now, if you thought this conversation was valuable, definitely subscribe, because there's more just like this one on the way. Around here, we think it's crucial to provide a safe and judgment-free place for people with different perspectives to come together and to learn from one another. Thanks for keeping it real with Reid. I'll see you soon.